What's good, people? So I was on YouTube yesterday just kind of watching a few videos when I came across ICT's Mentorship episode 41 of his free YouTube channel, and I got intrigued because it said it was the last episode of his ICT YouTube mentorship for 2022. Now I watched about 15-20 minutes of it because if any of you know my beginning journey, I actually started off with ICT. I started off kind of learning from him from his YouTube channel, but for me personally, he's not as refined as I like to be. I kind of went on the journey of trying to get very small specific stop losses, and I know he doesn't advocate for that. I have the most respect for him. I think he's a great guy. I think, yes, he does ramble on a little bit, but he's got a lot of information inside of his rambles, if you like. Now I just want to come out and say this video is not to slate his way of analyzing the market. It's not to say mine's better. It's not to say his is better. That this is just a kind of compare and contrast kind of video. I want to give you my perspective on the same chart that he was looking at and kind of give you the full narrative. Now, if you watch the video, he doesn't actually go over too much of the higher time frame narrative and maybe why he's looking to take this trade. And this is ultimately what I'm looking to provide in this video. So I'm going to stop waffling on. Let's get straight into the chart. So this is E-mini S&P 500, and we're starting on the monthly chart here. Now there's not too much to be doing on the monthly chart. For me, what I would do personally is, I want to be identifying structure. Really, I want to be identifying POIs, right? So we have potentially this area right here, right? So I'm going to mark that out as a bullish POI. And then we also have this one here, right? Now this is the one that we really want to be drawing our attention to right now, especially for the monthly chart. Now we can get down into a lower time frame and refine this area into a weekly, right? So we can refine that to the weekly POI right there. Now I'm also just going to draw a line from this low, because what we can actually see here is the E-mini S&P has actually swept this low from this POI, right? We've had this initial reaction from here, right? We pushed up, we failed to take out this previous high, and then we ran down and we've now taken out the low of the POI. So for now, what we can do is we can just delete the POI. So from the weekly time frame, we can start anticipating that potentially we have some sort of liquidity sweep on our hands. And what I mean by liquidity sweep is basically what's happened is price has swept this low all the way over here. This is a swing low, right? So we have a high low to the left and a higher low to the right. And what price has actually done is it's swept below that low and then closed back above on the weekly, right? So we're going to go into a lower time frame and start analyzing from the point in which the sweep happened. So the next time frame that we really need to go down to is the daily time frame. And as we can see, also what we have is a sweep on the daily time frame, which has actually given us a second candle, which is also swept. Now in ICT's video, he was going over what he was anticipating to happen on the 23rd of June 2022. So on the daily time frame, the first thing that my eyes really draw towards is this gap in between here, right? Basically what we've done is we opened up with a gap, right? So we can mark that off as a potential area in which price wants to reach for to be able to fill that gap and then to continue doing whatever it wants to do. So for me personally, I don't really have too much else to do on the daily time frame. We can now drop down into the 4-hour time frame. Once again, the first thing that my eyes are drawn to is we have a 4-hour change of character, right? So we have this low here, which gets taken out by this low. Only very slightly, but it does take it out. Then we also have the high, which is in between this low and this slightly lower low, right? So the highest point in between those two is your change of character high. So that's the first indication to me that price may be shifting to the upside. And this is obviously then in line with the daily and the weekly sweeping that previous low. With this information that we understand the 4-hour has changed character to the upside, what we can then do is then mark out the POI, which is just here. With all of this information happening prior to the 23rd, you can obviously then start anticipating and building your understanding and potentially what could happen. And then getting towards the end of the 22nd, we then start to push to the upside, and we actually have this break of structure right here. So going from ICT's narrative, what he kind of describes is basically inside of here we have a fair value gap, right? So for me, fair value gaps have never really kind of made sense. The way that I make sense of it is exactly how we're now going to go through. So what we can do is we can mark off this gap here, right? And then what we can do is find a specific area in which we anticipate price to come back to inside of this area or imbalance. Now, if we move down to a 15-minute time frame, what we can then begin to see is a bit more information on potentially where price could come back to specifically. So what I want to see in here is, potentially where a flip could be. So the first thing that comes to my eyes is I want to be looking at this high here, in between this sell to buy wicks, right? So this is an area in which I could be potentially interested in. So we can see to the left-hand side here, we have these two up close candles, which we can act as our flip, right? And then what I want to be doing is marking out this area here as our potential location in which price could then reverse from. So now we can just delete this, and then we can start looking into this area for a bit more refinement, a bit more of a specific candle in which we're looking for price to come back to. Dropping down to the 5-minute time frame, we can start looking in here, and obviously what you would do is you would actually be looking in here, you know, going through each time frame and just kind of figuring out where price actually needs to go. From the 5-minute time frame, we can actually see that we have this really nice doji kind of candle inside of here. This is like an inside bar, right? So it's inside the previous candle, and then the next candle kind of overtakes it, giving us some sort of engulfed candle. And then what we can see here is obviously through the New York session on the 22nd of June, we can obviously see that that break of structure up here has then pushed price to the upside. And then all the way through the Asian session on the 23rd of June, we can see here that relative equal lows are actually being formed. So we do have an initial mitigation of this flip zone. And then what we actually get in London session is, in the beginning of London session, we get a drive to the downside, which actually sweeps out these relative equal lows. And then what we can see here is when these equal lows get swept, we then get a little bit of kind of up and down price action. But what we actually have here is then a range being formed, okay? So we can mark off this range here as a potential POI in which we can look at to take a trade. Just prior to coming back into this POI, we actually have then formed relative equal lows just prior to the POI, which is then giving us our inducement, so we could potentially be quite confident on taking this trade. Once we finally get that mitigation of this POI, I then want to be going down to the lower timeframes, and I then want to be looking at potentially how I can then get into this trade with a relatively small stop loss, and then how to obviously target a higher time frame area. So as we can see here, what we have is we need to then start dissecting what has actually happened. So from here, what I can see is we've had this low, which has actually been taken out by this wick right here, right? So initially what we have is a liquidation, and then you can scale through the time frames and find what is the best looking 1 minute change of character, right? So here we have a really nice low which gets taken out by this area here, okay? And then the high in between that is right here, okay? So then what I can see is we have, our lower time frame change of character. And then for me personally, I always want a flip as well, right? So what we can do is we can start looking into these wicks here and saying, okay, well this high here has failed to take out this high, right? So we can use this area here and we can say, okay, well potentially there's going to be a flip here, right? So that gives us our area in which we are interested in looking at. And that ultimately comes down to this candle right here, okay? So this candle will be our flip zone, right? So we can use that as a bullish refined area. And then ultimately what we can do is we can just take an entry directly from the beginning of that POI with a stop loss just below here, okay? So that gives us a very nice precise entry in which prices, come into this initial flip zone, and then we've created a new range, which is, giving us our POI. And then once we've got into the POI, we've also liquidated some equal lows. And then we've got our lower time frame change of character. Prices actually swept more liquidity just before coming into this POI right here. And then we've ultimately just got a whole entry model right here. So being realistic, what you want to do is you want to really be taking some partials off above these relative equal highs here. Okay, so that's a very good location. But then ultimately, what can we really do? We can actually be holding this position all the way up to this potential imbalance or this void. What we can actually see if we then go out onto a slightly higher time frame is just after we take this first partial, what we then do is we then build relative equal highs right here as well. Okay, so then through the Asian session, price just slowly trickles to the upside. And then we come into London session, we kind of go a little bit sideways here. And then from New York session, we have a news event on Friday, which ultimately then runs price further to the upside and then ultimately filling in this void. So that's basically a full scale breakdown of how I would analyze the market and how I analyze the market every single day. I just want to give some appreciation out to ICT for doing his mentorship on YouTube. I think it's a really great thing, and I think it's really helping you guys. Hopefully you are, listening to what he's saying, getting through the rambles and actually taking a lot of information that he has to give. I came across ICT nearly 3 years ago now. And you can almost kind of say he's the reason that I am where I am today, because I started learning about smart money, learning about liquidity, learning about all of these kind of things with him. And then what I've done is I've developed my own journey, developed my own path into what I'm comfortable in trading and how I actually understand the market fully. If you are a struggling trader and you are looking for a bit more consistency or something to kind of build your knowledge, I would definitely recommend going to check out ICT's channel. You can't lose anything other than some of your time, right? And what you need to do is use your time wisely. Use your time studying something that is actually going to work. Obviously, ICT is a great place to start. Obviously, it's not for everyone. Not everyone can kind of stick through his information, through the way that he provides the information. And for me personally, he's not as refined as I like to be, but that's not an issue. That's completely down to your trading style and how you want to be as a trader. I hope you've taken something from this video, whether that be how to build narrative, how to build an understanding on potentially where price could go next, or the general understanding about how I would analyze the market in a specific scenario. Take care, I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.